Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Carolina Weather Group. This is the Wednesday, July 12th, 2017 edition of the Carolina Weather Group. We thank you for joining us tonight. We hope you've had a great week so far. Hopefully, it's not been too hot where you are viewing from tonight. It's kind of been a scorcher. Finally get into summer here with some summer heat in the Carolinas and throughout the Southeast. So tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about flooding. We know a lot of you guys who are watching tonight, if you live in the Carolinas, maybe along the coastal areas in Florida, Georgia. We've seen a lot of flooding issues along the Carolinas throughout the past couple of years. So tonight we're going to be talking about how we can effectively communicate the risk and uncertainties to the public about flooding. And we all see the videos of folks driving into floodwaters and stuff like that. So tonight we're going to kind of go into that, kind of talk about how we can better communicate those hazards to you guys. So welcome. We want to welcome our guests, Rachel and Burl, tonight. We'll let them introduce themselves here in just a little bit as we get into the show. This is a live broadcast, so if you are watching tonight, please feel free to interact with us. Several ways you can interact with us. Most thing that we watch a lot is the Twitter feed. So Carolina WX Group is one way to interact, or else you can be watching us on the Facebook Live, Periscope, or just send us a comment on our Facebook page. We'll be able to monitor all those throughout the show tonight. And if you're listening on the rebroadcast sometime later on this week or a couple weeks from now, we'll let our guests at the end submit how they can be communicated from you guys. So again, we want to welcome Rachel and Burl to the show. So before we do that, like we said, it has been hot throughout the area. Our first big hot spell here in the Carolinas. I know it's been hot here, so I'm going to toss it out to our most western district person, and that's Eric, who is in the Memphis, Tennessee tonight. Eric, how's the weather been over there in western Tennessee?
Hey, good evening, everybody. Glad to be with you again tonight. And apologies first for not being with you last week. I had a better excuse, I guess, better thing to do last week. No, but took advantage of concert that was here. Journey was here, and my wife and I went to that last weekend, or last Wednesday night, actually. Enjoyed ourselves. It was pretty decent weather, but it's gotten hot since then. Just like you said, it's like summer all of a sudden arrived here about a week ago. It was nice and pleasant, and May and June both below normal temperatures here, which May was the first the average temperature for May was the first time it was below normal since 2004, and June was also below normal, and I went back through records. I couldn't find the last time we had two below average months back to back, but July came, and we went from yesterday's high was 94, which is our hottest day of the year here. The dew points were still in the 60s the last several days, and they jumped up overnight. Today we were at about 92 dew points. This morning peaked at 78 middle of this morning, so it is definitely summertime here in Memphis, and now we got the humidity back, and so we'll start getting some more summer thunderstorms and all the stuff that goes with it. But overall, we really can't complain too much the way the summer has gone to this point. I just hope it's short-lived, and we have a beautiful August and September coming, which I'm sure we don't.
We're unraveling Shay Gibson's numbers. We'll let Shay come in here in just a little bit. First of all, I want to go to the Charlotte, North Carolina area and bring in James Brierton. James, how's the things in the Queen City tonight?
Also very warm here, Scotty. Matter of fact, this is not an official observation by any sense, because I understand that this is not an official weather observation or even a fully accurate weather observation. But the note I want to make tonight is that when I'm sitting here, this is also where I sit and work during the day. I work from home. There are windows right here, and they face kind of southward, but I get a really good beam of the sun coming in. So I have this little thermometer that I stuck in the window. Because despite the fact that I recently got my air condition fixed here, and it's a new unit, the temperature in my windowsill, let's see if I get this to focus, climbed to 111 degrees at one point this afternoon. So I do pull the blind shut, but I think I'm going to need to get some thicker blackout curtains, because it heats up in here, even with the air on. And so with the heat combined with just the beating of that sun on the window, confirmation, it does get quite toasty in here. I always thought so. So,
well, James, stay cool. James, you bring up a good point about that. You know, it's 111 in your windowsill. Imagine what it's like in those vehicles and stuff. You know, during.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I should leave this in my car tomorrow.
Maybe get some unbaked cookies and put them on a cookie sheet and see if we could have some cookies or something.
Is it the time of year where we do all those like traditional news stories? Like we're going to toss water into the air and it's going to evaporate and we're going to make an egg on the sidewalk.
I don't know. Let's ask Ricky Matthews. Ricky, have you done any of that yet? Oh, I think Ricky's froze.
Oh, he's
well.
going to do it right now. He's disappeared to go make eggs and cookies on the sidewalk out front.
Is it time for our James Spann heat safety tips yet? I'm just waiting for that.
Maybe we'll let Ricky. There he goes. He's back now.
There you go.
I'm probably intermittent tonight. I'm on our wonderful city of Hampton, the east coast of Virginia. I'm in and out every once in a while, but I want to do the crane one. That's the fun one I want to do.
That's true. I did see that one. I think Las Vegas, the Weather Service in Las Vegas did that.
Mm-hmm.
That was pretty cool. So how's the weather in the Hampton Roads area? I know you just got there, but how was your trip today? Uh-oh.
Icky, but everyone is like, oh my gosh, it's so hot, and heat advisors in effect, fun stuff, just like Friday and Saturday. And Friday on that tarmac at the airport, it's supposed to be 95, 96 degrees. And I love air shows, but I'm not exactly looking forward to being out on a hot tarmac for 6 hours or so with 96 degrees of heat. We'll get a nice sea breeze kicking in or something.
Make sure you get the sunscreen. That would be hot. So let's get down to Shay Gibson. Shay, you are in the tropical paradise of Charleston, South Carolina. How's things going down there in the Low Country this evening?
Thank you, Scotty. I don't think tropical paradise is quite the word for it. I mean, we're burning up down here. It's pretty hot. I'm not going to lie. I mean, this is typical summer in Charleston. We're in the 90s, low 90s to mid 90s. We got to the upper 90s late last week into the weekend. And heat indices were going up to about 108, 110 degrees. So, I mean, we were roasting pretty good. In fact, go ahead and share screen. And you can see even now, present to everybody, we're still showing some 90s. These 90s are burning off, especially in the Midlands. This is Columbia, Atlanta. These Piedmont areas, Midlands, tend to get a little bit higher than at the coastline because we have a southerly sea breeze that helps to sort of keep things a little bit cooler along the coastline. But if you look at our temperatures for the week for Charleston, you can see that they steadily climb back up again for the weekend. We do have a cold front coming, but it's not going to make it to the coast because guess what? Cold fronts come here to die, just like what Helicity Designs made our T-shirt. I ordered one. It's on the way here. That's exactly what's going to happen. So no relief from any cold fronts or rain, except for maybe some afternoon thunderstorms. And the heat is going to be on. It's going to stay on for quite some time. If we look at the winds for the southeast region, you can see these southeasterly winds down in Georgia become more southerly as they go up the coastline and all the way up to the Outer Banks. And that's mostly in part by this giant ridge out in the Atlantic. This is what's known as a Bermuda Azores Ridge. And as this builds further to the west, the sea breezes come up. If it builds further to the east over the Azores, the winds sort of weaken along the southeast region. So we're not getting a whole lot of relief from stronger sea breezing to cool things down a little bit. Let me go back to this map. This is our Datascope viewer with weather flow. And let's see, water level. I want to show you the sea surface temperature, Scotty. Look how warm it is out there. I mean, there's really just no reprieve from it at all. I mean, our sea surface temperatures, if I can go back to water level. Sea surface temperature, I'm having a hard time loading that one. Oh, there it is on the graph. 87.1 degrees. So it was 87.3 degrees earlier, which tied yesterday's record. So, I mean, that's pretty warm. And all of that together really leads to sort of a powder keg for tropics whenever they decide to turn on, if we ever get anything over this way with relaxed upper shear. These really warm waters could be sort of problematic for the area. Getting back to National Hurricane Center, speaking of the tropics, there's always like to talk about tropics. Everything looks clear. We had a couple of tropical waves that the models were really building on. One fizzled away, that was O4L, which became TD number 1 for the Atlantic. Or was it number 2? I think it was TD2. I'm trying to remember all of them. We haven't had that many, but this is the 8 p.m. update. And then we had another wave that was coming off of Africa that sort of fizzled away. The models really built it. GFS really built it. The Euro did not. And the Euro ended up being correct on that. So we also look to this time of the year, any tropical waves coming off of the African coast along the main development region, or the ITCZ, Intertropical Convergence Zone. We look at the Saharan air dust. For the viewers out there, this is a mid-level layer of dust that comes off of Africa. It's suspended at about 18,000 feet. It is cooler air because it's iron-rich and reflects the sunlight. This really dissipates tropical waves coming off of the African coast. It really saves us from a lot of storms. So you can see a little wave down there already just sort of being torn apart by it, or basically stabilized by this layer. We call this the dusty tongue of the Saharan desert. And this is one thing that we tend to watch quite a bit as we look at these giant Azores highs, Bermuda Azores highs too. This is what brings easterly trades all the way through the Caribbean to Cuba and the Keys. The steering pattern is in that way, but when you have dry, stable air, plus this huge ridge to the north, it tends to not be favorable for tropical development. So that's going to wrap it up for the southeast and the tropics. Scotty, back to you.
Thanks, Shay. And you and I were going back and forth, I think, a couple of days ago about how warm it is and the warm ocean temperatures. So I know it's not good news for the tropics, but as a beach lover like me and who doesn't really like chilly water, I like those 87-degree water temps. So I guess at least one of us are happy about that.
Yeah, I mean, every once in a while we get a northeast wind that'll cut down into the area, and that'll sort of cool things down. We get a little bit of a temperature difference in the water. It'll drop about 4 or 5 degrees, which makes a world of difference. I mean, 4 or 5 degrees in the water is a lot. And we're just, we're enjoying it. You go to the beach, you get in the water, and the evaporative processes actually help cool you down. It's not too bad out there, but it is hot and sticky all around the coastal and inland areas. So hot and humid.
Yeah, and Shay, one more thing before we kind of get into the topic tonight. I had a couple of water spouts in the Outer Banks of North Carolina this week, Monday. You guys actually had some funnel clouds as well down in the Charleston area on Monday.
Yeah, that's right. We had a funnel cloud appear just inside the Charleston Harbor over by the Ravenel Bridge. It went over the bridge and over by the Wando Terminal, which is a little further inland than normal. It's actually kind of rare to see a spout or a funnel cloud that far upriver. So we have 3-river system. They usually follow the 2 rivers to the west, which is the Wando and the Cooper rivers. This one went to the Wando River. There was a water spout behind Deweese Island, which is to our north. There was also a water spout witnessed and taken pictures of in Edisto. So yeah, water spouts are this kind of weak ridging process, and you get a lot of onshore flow in those morning time convective cells. They're called cumuliform banks or cumuliform clouds, and they sort of, this real sensitive light wind environment. They're not like tornadoes. They start from the water and work their way up, and they're just really cool to see. Very quiet episodes, very unique events that are hard to catch. You have to really be looking for them to catch them.
Yeah, and I know a lot of photo ops in the Outer Banks. If you followed us on Twitter this week, you're able to see a lot of those funnel clouds and water spouts. So if you have not looked at our Twitter account, look at it. You'll see some cool videos. So I'm going to see if Ricky can hear us. I know Ricky was having some problem with the internet. If he's not go, then we'll start the conversation. I'll start it. So Ricky, you got it, or you think?
I can hear you, but for the purpose of this show, it's probably best if you handle it.
Okay, sounds good. All right, well, let's bring in our guests tonight. We have Rachel Hogan on and Beryl Montez joining us. Ladies, I'll let you introduce yourself to our followers and listeners tonight. Tell us a little bit about you and what you do, and then we'll get into tonight's topic.
Okay, great. My name is Rachel Hogan Carr. I'm Executive Director of Nurture Nature Center in Easton, Pennsylvania, which is a science center with a focus on flood risk communication and flooding issues. And we've done a number of social science research studies about how the public understands flood products and flood warnings from National Weather Service and other places. And we've partnered with Dr. Montz on that, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Beryl Montz. I'm a professor of geography at East Carolina University. I've worked with Rachel, as she said, in Nurture Nature Center on a number of projects. I've done a number of other projects throughout the decades, I guess, on responses to warnings, risk communication, public policy, and those sorts of things with respect to all kinds of different hazards. But floods are my favorite.
All right. Well, and Beryl, with you living in the Greenville area, you've seen quite the heavy rain last year with Hurricane Matthew, and the year before that, we've seen the major flooding in the South Carolina area. So, like you said, this kind of hits home with you.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Matthew was really interesting from my perspective as a researcher, but also as a homeowner. I didn't flood, which was wonderful. Part of my neighborhood did, but I didn't, and it was stormwater flooding. It wasn't river flooding, just because of how much it rained and how fast. So,
Wow.
yeah, and you know, as a geographer, I study a lot about land use and planning or lack of. So it was a really good example of that.
Very good. Well, Rachel, I'll let you start tonight. I know Shay said you had like a presentation, so we'll let you start, and we'll kind of go along with the show tonight, and we'll pop in and ask some questions and stuff like that.
That sounds good. Easton, Pennsylvania, where I'm from, is a very flood-prone town, which is why Nurture Nature Center was actually formed in the first place. And we've had a long spell of dry weather with no flooding, and just in the past few weeks, we've had some of the most tremendous downpours. And we thought we were going to be faced with flooding, but we're spared. But yeah, I'll put on my screen, and I'll show you some of the work that Dr. Montz and I have done together over the past 5 years, looking at why and how people decide to respond to flood watches and warnings, and why they don't. So if you just give me a second to share my screen here. Okay.
No problem, Rachel. Once you share your screen, I'm going to present it to everyone, so that way it'll stay up the whole time, even if we're asking questions about it.
Oh, super. Okay. Okay, can you see?
We were good to go.
Yes.
Okay, super. So this is a presentation that we've done many times over the years, and that continues to grow as we do more research together. And the fundamental idea is talking about how we design this flood data that's out there to notify communities of impending flood events to best communicate the risk. And Dr. Montz and I have taken turns being the lead on the projects, but have just effectively worked side by side in a number of these projects. East Carolina University is well known to you all. In Easton, Pennsylvania, Nurture Nature Center is a smaller organization, but with a unique focus, as I mentioned, on flood risk. And since our inception, over the past 10 years, we've conducted a number of outreach, education, and social science research projects in cooperation with NOAA, National Weather Service, FEMA, and other organizations to try to help the public understand flooding and the risks inherent, and also to try to help the policymakers and decision makers, scientists and meteorologists to understand what needs in process the information that they're given. So I put us in the middle here as sort of a mediator between the experts and the affected populations, so that we sort of serve as an organization designed to help improve communication between those two. And the fundamental issue is probably something that viewers of this podcast are really familiar with, which is that the Weather Service and other organizations provide increasingly tremendous amounts of timely and accurate data related to flooding. So we know when a river flood is going to come. We have pretty good warning now about flash floods and when they're going to come. And despite all this, and as technology continues to improve and lead time improves, still so often we find circumstances where people are not responding the way that they should to protect their life and property. And so our partners have often been weather forecast offices in the National Weather Service, including the Mount Holly, New Jersey, Philadelphia office, where Gary Zatkowski, who you may be familiar with, recently retired as meteorologist in charge. And he would talk often in our projects about his career and how he'd see lead times increasing for many of these hazards, and realized that technology had come a long way, and now the next step was to use social science to understand how to communicate what that technology is telling so people can get moving. Meteorological science, and how do we most effectively communicate risk? And when we're talking about communicating risk when it comes to flooding, we really mean two things in our studies. How can these Weather Service products be easier to understand? At the fundamental level, can I look at them and can I understand the facts that are being told to me? And then secondly, and this is what's really important, how can these products better motivate people to take action? It's one thing to understand, it's another to have it actually spur you to take some action. So we've done 3 studies looking at National Weather Service's various suite of riverine and coastal hydrologic projects and products, and specifically flood products. The first study was in 2012. We looked and did focus groups and surveys with audiences in Easton, Pennsylvania, where we are, which was frequently underwater, at the convergence of two beautiful rivers, the Delaware and the Lehigh. And then Lambertville, New Jersey, which is a smaller community along the river, along the Delaware River, that has repeatedly found itself underwater at the Delaware. In 2000, and in that project I'll describe a bit more, but there we were really looking at riverine communities and riverine flood tools. As we were going through that study, of course, Superstorm Sandy came along and did what it did, affected by Sandy very heavily in New Jersey, specifically residents and emergency managers in Ocean and Monmouth counties. And there we looked at coastal flood tools and emergency briefings. And currently, right now, we're partway through a third study looking at a brand new system that the Weather Service is experimenting with right now and is about to roll out nationally, I believe possibly later this year even, called the Hydrologic Ensemble Forecast System. And this is an ensemble forecast that shows uncertainty in the range of hydrologic outcomes and is a tremendous new powerhouse of data. And the question that we're looking at there is, how do we make this most usable and most user-friendly for a wide range of audiences? So the basis of our focus groups has been, of our studies have been focus groups and surveys and interviews. So we've really spent a lot of time talking with affected residents. And at the heart of each of these, we used a scenario-based approach. And we would take groups of participants through 2-hour focus groups. There was usually about 15 people in the room, 10 to 15 people in the room, and we'd spend 2 hours walking them through a scenario that was realistic or had actually occurred. The first one in the riverine context, our Weather Service partners called Hurricane Rachel. I didn't take it too personally. And that was modeled after the major flood of record and hurricanes of record, the flood of 55 in our region, and was a 7-day event. So it was a 7-day lead up into the actual landfall and heavy impacts. And we did the same process in each of the focus groups. And within those focus groups then, the participants would provide feedback on the timing that they wanted for the information, the sources that they wanted to receive information from, the clarity of the graphics, and importantly, how they would share the information with others and how the products motivated action, or in many cases, did not. Here we can see the list of products that we looked at. There's a broad range. We looked heavily at the hydrograph, which I'll show you later from the Advanced Hydrologic Prediction Service, various weather outlooks, warnings, flood watches and warnings, flash flood watches and warnings, the significant flood outlook and also hazardous weather outlooks. Our coastal study looked heavily at emergency briefings and the extratropical storm surge. And we also looked at some other products, including wind speed, hurricane cone, lightly, and importantly, these new ensemble forecasts that instead of saying exactly what is going to happen and issuing a deterministic forecast for what's going to happen, show a range of potential outcomes. And this is a new capacity that's being developed and refined as we speak. So some broad takeaways, what we learned, generally speaking, is that design of the products really matters. How the products look, how they function, how they use color, how they appeal quickly or don't, really makes a big difference in whether or not respond to them, take away the data that they need, and then decide to do something about it. Here are 3 products: the Significant River Flood Outlook. The middle one is one of the ensemble forecasts that we tested in the Riverine study from the Middle Atlantic River Forecast Center area. It's called an MMEFS system, ensemble forecast. And the last one is a quantitative precipitation forecast map that shows various predicted levels of rainfall that would be coming from an impending storm. So these are examples of the kind of products that the participants would see during their time. A key takeaway is that river levels really matter. The hydrograph that you see here is a really highly preferred product. Riverine communities especially rely on this heavily. They understand it better than many other products. They feel like they understand it very well. They thought it was very visually clear, useful, very location specific, and it was information that they relied on moment to moment to decide whether or not they were going to take action. They called it the Bible, the gold standard, and they really embraced this product matters tremendously. So this was one of the products that when everyone saw it, they said, ooh, okay, I like that. Red, I get. A lot of rainfall's coming my way. If I'm in the red zone, I know I'm in trouble. And so very quickly, we could start to see these patterns where the use of color could really advance the product and how it was used, or if the use of color was not clear, it could take the most meaningful data and quickly make it fall flat. And we'll show some examples of how that happened. So color was important, and the lack of color sometimes was really important. Here's a case in point. This is called the Significant River Flood Outlook. And this is a product that our riverine communities in many different ways told us they really wanted. This would give you a 5-day heads up that, hey, there may be some significant river flooding coming your way. But when we showed this product in the scenario, the participants said, no way, I don't like that. They couldn't extract much information out of it. They couldn't figure out where they were on the map. They didn't know what the orange shading was. They thought the hard orange outline on the outside boundary that's there said that flooding was already happening. And the patterning on that little legend down there shows the difference between river flooding possible or likely, but no one could discern based on those little dots and lines which was going on. And so even though this product gave some really excellent early heads-up data to communities that say, I want early heads-up data, it ended up being an ineffective tool for them. There's a lack of location detail and a lack of motivation to act. The uncertainty messages that are becoming increasingly common in forecasting, we also tested in a number of these studies. And these are examples of the MMEFS graphics that show a range of potential hydrologic outcomes at a specific point. And when we showed these, people will back me up if I say nobody understood anything about them. They were incredibly complicated looking. People made references to their chemistry class, took away essentially no information from these whatsoever. They read the titles, which say things like GEFS base stage simulation expected value plot, and said, I have no idea what I'm even supposed to be gathering out of these. So we spent a lot of time talking through these products, all of these various products with the audiences, getting their feedback on what would make them better. We went back, we mocked them up, and we retested them in every project. We retested them with a second group of new folks who hadn't seen them. And we incorporated those changes, and these are some of the things that we learned. Here's an example of a draft mocked up hydrograph. You see to the left is the shown, to the right, we enhanced the color distinction between observed and forecast areas. We changed the title of the product to Observed and Forecast River Levels. And we also added a bar that would indicate when there was a flood watch or warning in effect. Interactivity with the hydrograph, because that was the gold standard. So we took a number of changes, even to this beloved product, and they really helped the audience to understand the difference between major flooding, moderate flooding, minor flooding, and what actions really meant and how they should respond to them. This is the mock-up of the river flood outlook that we did. On the left was as we showed it. On the right, some simple but thoughtful changes to the design significantly improved how the audiences understood what was happening. They could tell where flooding was likely, where they could tell where they were. We put some geographic place names. We called it the 5-day river flood outlook instead of significant, because people indicated significant could mean many different things to different people. So we called it damaging instead, down in the legend. It was a damaging river flood. This is really impact-based language. This is what people want to know. Is there going to be damage affecting them? So these are some of the kinds of changes that we made. With the mocked up uncertainty graphics, the MMEFS, this underwent a radical rehaul. This we talked at length with the public and the audiences in our focus groups about everything from the title to the use of color to how we should portray certainty and confidence. And so we have a significantly improved legend. We've used a color bar in order to indicated where the percent certainty levels are. And in the second round, this one scored tremendously better among participants who were able to have a richer discussion how they might use uncertainty. It still was not a crowd favorite, but it was much more helpful the second time around. And we're happy to show this product here was actually transitioned into operations by the Middle Atlantic River Forecast Center. They took our suggestions and they modified the product. They came up with what you see on the screen there. I think they did a beautiful job of incorporating our suggestions into their system. And they say that they've gotten really great feedback that this product is much more widely used by news media, by FEMA, by other weather service offices themselves. And for them, it was really about making some decisions about what was critical information, what could be left out in favor of simplicity, and striking a balance. They did a great job. In the coastal study, one other key point I want to make is that we studied emergency briefings there. And in the Sandy affected areas, briefings went out really early during Superstorm Sandy and allowed the first heads up to folks in those areas that something big was coming. And it became clear, I think, during that event that briefings could be a powerful tool. And so we tested these with the audiences there, among other products, and learned that one of the powerful things a briefing can do is connect an audience to the forecasters. In this case, there was a personal plea included in there from Gary Zatkowski to the audience that was highly effective among our audiences in motivating action, either because they'd seen it and they said, that's when I decided to take action, or they said, had I seen it, it would have been highly effective. So something that really connected them to the forecast. A briefing can convey tone, it can prioritize the risks for people, but we did learn that they should be reserved for really high impact events. And we know that they need to be kept short, they need to be concise, and they need to really emphasize the action steps that people need to take. We heard a lot that people really love to talk about the meteorology, but from the residents and the people who are trying to make decisions, what they need to know is, what do we do about it? So they said, put the meteorology information in detail at the end of the briefing, but tell us up front, what do we do now? What are the actions we really need to take? So we did some design modifications and made some recommendations for basic strategies to improve the briefings. And the Northeast region has revised their briefing template as a result and incorporating those suggestions. So they're really being receptive to trying to do these things that public audiences tell them are going to be most important. I won't go into detail here, but this is the extratropical surge graphic, another one that we mocked up from original to revised. Again, changing the title so that the title quickly tells you what you're looking at, observed and forecast water levels, and using better use of legends and color to let the audience know. Our current study is at HEFS, I mentioned, Hydrologic Ensemble Forecast System. We looked at audiences in emergency managers, residents, and water resource managers in Jefferson County, West Virginia, and Frederick County, Maryland. We did 2 rounds of focus groups with them with a 4-day tropical storm scenario, looking at the same basic questions. What improvements to the forecast products, and specifically these HEFS products that show ensembles, forecasts, and uncertainty, how could they be improved? What barriers exist to using them already? And what modifications would help make them better? This is an example of the products as they're currently being issued internally. These are not actually given out to the public yet. And in round 1, residents found them very confusing. Emergency managers noted that there was utility in the information that was conveyed. They were more favorable toward them, but they were not overwhelmingly received. We went back and did a preliminary round of revisions for round 2, and you can see that here. We retested with these and got better response and more further response from residents about what works and doesn't work, further response from emergency managers about what works and doesn't work. And we're in the process right now of doing a 3rd revision that's going to be even a significant enhancement to this one. We're about to launch an online survey with participants for a final test. And then we will make recommendations about that product. And I just want to close with saying that one of the fun things about doing these studies, beyond the fact that we get to help make practical changes that then can be implemented, is that for the participants themselves, it's clear that this conversation about weather and about products affects them and makes their life better. And I thought, as weather podcasters, you all would be interested to know that these conversations really do cause people to think about what they're doing and what they do as they walk out the door. So emergency managers told us after doing these sessions, they would be using these ensembles more. They'd be sharing with others. They'd be thinking about creating some plans. Residents said similar sorts of things. That they would be talking with others, that they would be looking at their plans, that they would be thinking about using uncertainty information. And so these projects have these two levels of effect that I think are pretty gratifying. We'll be putting our results out soon. We do have a website, socialscience.focusonfloods.org, where you can see the final reports from these studies, watch videos, get more detailed information. And we'll have a new page there coming up soon for the latest study. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions about that.
That's some great research. Wow. I really liked it. Bro, I want to bring you into this conversation. It was noted in some of the research, people not knowing where they live on a map. That to me is just still scratch my head somewhat about people who don't know where they live on a map. As a geography major, how do you feel about that?
I think we didn't find that people didn't know where they lived. I think it was more they wanted to get a sense of where they were with respect to what was happening. So with the significant flood outlook, for instance, they could see sort of general, I mean, the scale of the map is so small, it shows a large area, right? So given the scale of the map, it's sort of hard to see the differences in places. And so we hear a lot from broadcasters, we hear it from a whole lot of people that say, I need to know what's going to happen in my house. Mm-hmm. So they need to be able to personalize the information. So I think that's really what it's about. They sort of know, they know where they live, but they don't always get where it fits in the big picture given the scale of at which the products are being presented.
That's very good information. Rachel, you're talking about the probabilities, the uncertainty graphics. Just recently, I think this past year was the first year that our National Weather Service office here in the Western North Carolina area started using those uncertainty graphics with winter weather regarding snowfall accumulations. Expected amount could be less than this. I really find that useful as a meteorologist. It kind of helps me express the uncertainty of what's going to happen, and it looks like these graphics really helped once you guys kind of got in and got to tweak them a little bit.
Yeah, I think that I'll speak to that. I think that's the case. People can deal with uncertainty. They deal with it all the time. But it's trying to understand how it's being portrayed. And so they appreciate understanding that. Now, they don't always make the right decisions based on that uncertainty. But I think knowing something about it is helpful. And I don't know what Rachel has to add to that.
Oh, her computer may have froze. I'm not seeing any movement down there. You have to.
Yeah, she might have frozen again.
She may have.
Yeah, maybe. I have something to add though. I really like the way that the information was sort of tweaked to be more understandable to the public. And there's a lot of new products coming out. The NHC, in fact, they have their new storm surge inundation product, which looks something like this, which is great. It gives you a sense of where you are on the map. It has names. It's more zeroed in. It's a higher resolution map showing what areas could be affected. This is potential storm surge flooding. I think this was for maybe Matthew. This is just a mock-up, but it gives you a better idea. And that's always been kind of the case is what sort of products are people looking at? And then the other part of the equation is everyone able to get this information? So we end up as being social media entities and really harnessing an audience. Each of us have our own audiences. People pay attention to the National Weather Service, the TV Mets. A lot of people are not on TV. They're not checking the National Weather Service sites. They're on the internet, Facebook, Twitter, you name it. So we have to use these maps, the ones that you all are suggesting changes for. It's very important that these products are easy to read. When we put it out there, we don't want to have to explain it in a book form to people to show what's going on. So I really love what you're doing with the products. I think the suggestions are great and the changes are phenomenal.
Thanks. I think one of the issues Oh, there's Rachel. Yay.
Hi.
You have to love technology.
Yeah, we appreciate that comment. I mean, to a certain extent, meteorologists aren't graphic designers, right? We know that. And so when meteorologists develop products, they develop them the way they know them and the way they understand them. So, I mean, I think we've come a long way that, you know, that the Weather Service and others want the kind of information that Nurture Nature and other social science researchers like me and others can do to help the process in understanding those products, so that you can translate that really important information into something that people understand. And some of it they'll never understand.
One of the interesting things we learned in this regard is that NOAA and National Weather Service are key sources of information, and that's where people want to get their data. When people were making decisions, they said we would go to hear what NOAA and National Weather Service said. But then they also said that they wanted to know somehow that the information they were getting applied to that goes back to that geographic specificity. And so when people are looking to find up or to hear their name of their town in a weather forecast in order to make decisions, one thing that they said multiple times is that they really wanted to hear from their local emergency managers and their local officials. To get that Weather Service data passed through their emergency managers gave them 2 stamps of approval. One, that this was quality data, that this was relevant to the community where they were. And those 2 seals of approval were really important for people in deciding, brilliant where I live, and do I now take this data? And we thought that was pretty interesting feedback and finding too.
Rachel, that's a good point, because there's usually several entities that are feeding into this information. You also get some of the state entities feeding in as well, the state climate offices. So you get different products from them. You get products from the National Weather Service. I remember Hurricane Matthew was coming last year. There was some miscommunication, I think, from the south to north, where Savannah had a higher storm surge than Charleston. It was conveyed that we would be having that type of storm surge here when it was significantly less, by 4 or 6 feet. And so, you know, there was some confusion about that. I think a lot of folks, I'm not, you know, there's no finger pointing. It's better to be safe than sorry. But when the flood inundation maps came out, I think people pretty much got a good idea of what was going on, especially the way that the TV Mets here in Charleston conveyed that information. But you know, it all comes down to which maps are going to be the standard. If you look at the State Climate Office maps, they have a different format than the National Weather Service. Charleston has a different format than the National Hurricane Center does, and so what would you suggest be sort of be the binder for all of these? Would you rather the local National Weather Service offices be in charge, or the National Hurricane Center, or precipitated from one to the other?
I would let the Weather Service decide and NOAA decide which of its offices reign, but consistency is the point. I think that having consistency and consistent messages has been shown time and time again to be important. And where consistency is impossible or hard to achieve for whatever reason, then at very least clarity is what really matters. So if it's very difficult to get consistency in the use of your color and in your mapping, at very least make sure that your legends tell exactly and quickly and easily what's going on, so that people can decide what they're seeing. But it is a risky game to have lots of seemingly contradictory information, or confusing information going out and causing people to say, but it doesn't look like what I just saw. So I think consistency is a key part of the game. Maybe Burl has some thoughts there too.
I do. In fact, when there is inconsistent information coming from different sources, what we found in a number of studies is that people tend to they'll check a number of sources to try to triangulate what they think is going to happen. And many people have their trusted source. It could be their favorite broadcast meteorologist. It could be, if I hear it from the emergency manager, that's the person I'm going to listen to. But if there is, and there's often inconsistent information because different forecasts, different models. So people do kind of try to triangulate. So, I mean, I think consistency in the products from one source like NOAA is important, certainly. But we also have to recognize that people are going to check other sources. as well, and try to get as much information as they can. And the other thing they always do is talk to other people, and those other people may or may not be knowledgeable. So there's always that battle you're fighting.
Yeah, it starts out as a little ball, and it's this big by the time it gets to the end of the line, right? Yeah, the whole domino effect,
exactly.
conversation.
So Burl, if I could follow up on that, then, so you have all of the different products that are being issued and different agencies, or everybody's got their own local source that they trust. So from a social science perspective, then, is the bigger problem, do you think, just the wide array of products maybe all trying to say the same thing in different ways getting across to the public, or is it the actual response of the public to that information, which may be, you could again kind of triangulate and come up with a common description of the hazard, but getting people to just respond in the first place?
Well, I think it's the response of the public, because again, the Weather Service is a very trusted source, and they send information out to emergency managers. It goes through their networks. So they are getting a lot of the same information, just from different sources. So it isn't all the time very different information. But people have different response mechanisms. They have different risk aversions or lack of risk aversion. So people deal with that information differently, and they perceive their own risk differently. That's why I'm a social scientist, because I think it's called job security. We're never really going to figure out why people do what they do. But so, there is that. You can give some people all the best information, and they're still going to drive around that barrier no matter what.
Right.
So I can't help that. We can do our best.
Right. Thanks.
Rachel, I was thinking as you were going through those slides not too long ago, you were talking about some of the feedback that you both and your teams have collected from folks, and I'm just wondering what that feedback mechanism is. I'm envisioning kind of, I think, what I've seen in movies and TVs, where you have a focus group maybe reviewing like a commercial product. Is that similar to the way this is structured?
Very similar, yeah. We're sitting in various libraries and fire halls and sort of community gathering places that were easily accessible for residents or emergency managers, sometimes the emergency management office. And we'd be sitting either classroom style or sometimes kind of round table, and we'd have a projector, and it would be Burl up in the front of the room, and she'd be leading and saying, okay, folks, here's what we're going to be doing today, and we're going to be walking through this scenario. And she'd say, in day 1, or day T-7, here's what the Weather Service is showing, and we'd have a projector and it would show them the images. And then we'd just pause there for a bit and go product by product, day by day, and say, now what are you doing? What's happening here today, and how are you feeling about this? And people would start jumping in and saying, well, right about now is when I'd be calling my grandmother in Florida to make sure she's okay, because it looks like the hurricane's down her way, and maybe I'll decide based on how bad it is down in Florida whether or not I'm going to, and we'd spend about an hour and a half or to 2 hours with each of these groups walking through these. And as we got later in them, we would really start to break down, once we went through the scenario, now let's talk about some of these key products, and let's go back to them and say, really, what is going on with these and what works and doesn't for you. And they would give us amazingly high quality feedback, really motivated audiences who had lived through flooding and knew this mattered.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, looking through those slides and this conversation so far, I think we've echoed it several times. It's so valuable and great information. I've completely lost track of time. I just looked down and went, where'd the hour go? Because I'm thinking about every broadcast med or every scientist we've had on this show, who I think sometimes, really wishes they had some of this kind of street level, if you will, or individual level feedback from folks to exactly how they warrant it. And I just kind of wanted to get some insight on that and echo what some of the other team members were saying. And we talked about that graphic where you can see the water rising, and we used that not too long ago ourselves. We had a flash flood warning in the Charlotte area, and we had it actually next to some USGS cameras to give people a visual next to that graph on social. So I think that information that goes a long way. So my last question, and then I will I guess yield my time to whoever else wants to hop in, goes to either one of you ladies. And we talked about it a little bit earlier, but I was wondering from a communication standpoint, Is there anything you found, any quote-unquote magic formula to helping people really feel comfortable and getting them into a position where they're feeling confident enough to make that assessment themselves as to what's going to happen in my backyard?
The magic bullet?
Yeah, I suppose so.
Okay, I'll take a stab at the magic bullet. No, we didn't find it.
Okay.
But if I had to say the things that really matter, that there is a clear communication that there is a potential risk in the vicinity that the person is calling home, at least, or is where they are. So the people really need to understand that the risk associated with this event, and they need to understand what that risk is likely to affect where I am. And getting those two pieces of information sounds really simple, but I think we learned that it's not quite as simple. And if you can combine those two pieces, that there is a risk that I can say, there's a risk that this place may be flooded right where I am right now, and therefore I should take some action, is really critical. And then the second thing that became clear, especially in the coastal study, is you had to tell them not only that they had the risk, but what to do about it. So people are really looking for the action information. As Burl said, they'll triangulate information. They will call others, find out, is this risk real and true, and what are you doing about it? And then they will make decisions based on that. So clear, actionable information about a risk at a place where a person is affected would be my best guess at a magic bullet. Burl?
Oh, Burl, you'll have to unmute your microphone.
It should be on the top bar. There's a little microphone. You just
Okay, I got it.
There you go.
Did I get it?
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't
good.
know I did it. My phone. Anyway, the other thing that I would add is that people look for environmental cues. So they can see a hydrograph and say it might flood. There's a forecast for a flood. They're going to go look at the river.
Yeah.
When there's severe weather, they're going to go look at the sky. So we can give them all the information we want. And so I think that gets at sort of the question about location, how important that is, the environmental cues. So I would add that to what Rachel said. I think it's all of the above. So there's several silver bullets several things that make the silver bullet. Unfortunately, they all take time.
I think those are some fabulous insights and for important things for communicators to keep in mind. Eric, I think you had another question.
Yeah, I've got one more, and I think I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the ongoing research that's being done by the National Weather Service as well in their hazard simplification project. And I know that they've done a lot of focus group studies and scenarios, and they're looking at consolidation of various products, so they try to narrow down the wide array of not only flood products but winter products and some of the others. I know they're planning to do a little bit of simplification or consolidation with some of the winter stuff this fall, and I know that there's also an effort, I think probably early next year, to take some of the flood and flash flood information and consolidate some of that as well. And I'm kind of interested in your thoughts on where they've gone with that, and if you think that by consolidating some of those, having less names for products and more bulleted, maybe actionable type information, how that will work out.
I'll start. I think it's a great project. I think they're on the right track. People don't know the difference between nuisance flooding and riverine flooding and flash flooding. It's water, and it's a whole lot of it. And so there's all kinds of issues with that. And I think that that's really important. I think the consolidation of it, that simplification, if you will, is really important. And I'm delighted that the Weather Service is doing this, because they're recognizing that they've got a lot of good information, but it's not getting across. And so they're looking very seriously at how to get that across better. And I applaud them for that effort.
I would agree. We heard that number of times in the various studies that people struggled with the difference between even a watch and a warning, not understanding when one would expire and one would be issued and what it meant. And so I think that the simplification process is absolutely a step in the right direction, and it would be supported by all of the focus groups that we did as well. So we're looking forward to seeing that come to fruition.
Yeah, I think, especially on the winter weather side, but it applies to flooding as well. It really doesn't matter how that phenomena is created. If you're going to have 2 feet of water in your house, it doesn't matter whether it came from the surf or from a river flooding or whether we got 6 inches of rain in an hour. The point is you need to take action. And so, calling it a flood warning and then just describing it's because of this, I think is also a step in the right direction, and less colors on the periodic table of Weather Service watch warning advisories.
Yep, absolutely.
Great metaphor.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed your discussion this evening.
Great to be here.
Okay, well, I got one more question, and this has to do with response from the public. Outside of the focus groups that you've done, have you seen a drastic better response from the public as a result of the changes that you've made to the graphics? And if you have, how would you gauge that? I guess that'll go to Rachel first. I'm sorry, go ahead, bro.
No, Rachel, go ahead.
I think as social science researchers, we don't get to see firsthand how they are used. What I can rely on is our Weather Service partners who told us that the revised ensemble forecast graphics that we did through the Riverine product were much better received. And so we later heard that even by the forecasters who used them, they found them much easier to use, and that they got tremendous feedback from their partners who are on various advisory boards, from various media outlets and other places, that these new versions of the products were much more helpful. So that was very gratifying. There's a long change process for a lot of the other recommendations that we made, and some of the various recommendations we made are in a change process at various levels. And the Weather Service has been very receptive and helpful in letting us know where it is. So I think that these changes are going to happen over a number of years, and that the Weather Service is in a process of continually refining what they're doing. So I think we're going to keep seeing reverberations that may be on a day-by-day basis.
Yeah, I don't think that we can come up with any cause and effect.
Yeah.
I think we're sort of taking baby steps toward better response.
Great, thank you. All right, well, Scotty, back to you.
Yeah, I have one more question before we kind of close up. Burl, I'll direct this question to you first, since you're really into social science and stuff. Was you surprised? And I want to preface this with saying, one of my jobs as a meteorologist is I consult with emergency management, local emergency management offices. Was you guys surprised when you first started to take on this task that local government wasn't really prepared as much as you thought they would be?
Actually, I don't think they're not prepared. I mean, the folks I've worked with in North Carolina and New York and some other places, I think local government's pretty prepared. I just don't think emergency managers have to deal with politics. And maybe, I think the emergency managers are prepared, but I think that, politicians, local government officials sometimes have blinders on until they have an experience that they have to deal with, and then they learn. And experience is a great teacher. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but, I've worked a lot with emergency managers, and I'm really impressed with how much they know and how prepared they are and how hard they work. It's a job I'd never want, and I'm really impressed with it. So I don't know if I answered your question. Sorry.
No, that was fine. The emergency management teams that I work with, they are very prepared, and they've done numerous drills and practices and stuff like that to be prepared. But I was just wondering if some of the folks that you guys have worked with maybe not as prepared. So that's good to hear that they were prepared.
Well, local officials don't want to call for evacuations. They don't want to close down businesses unnecessarily. So the emergency managers have to be the ones that recommend that, time to evacuate, time to do this, time to do that. And that's a hard call. Mm-hmm. So I think local officials, political officials, can be very resistant, but if they trust their emergency managers, then good decisions are made.
Rachel, do you have anything to add to that?
Something I say all the time is that getting ready for hazards is a community job. It's not an individual job only. Yes, you have to get your household ready. Yes, you should have an emergency preparedness plan. But it really happens at a community level when a community embraces, we have an ever-present threat of flooding. We're at the confluence of two rivers or a major river, and it has to happen from the top down. Every emergency management community I've worked with is highly prepared. They're often faced with a community that hasn't wanted to deal with its risk because it's not pleasant, it's not favorable toward real estate sales, it has all of these kind of barriers. But as soon as a community can really embrace it and start talking about it openly, planning it, I think that's where the real resiliency starts to come together. And I think emergency managers often lead that. And meteorologists.
All right, well, our final question, especially for our first-time guests on the show, we always like to close the show out, and I guess we should really open the show with this question. But what got you interested in weather, and specifically, what got you interested in the flooding and maybe the flood science behind the research that you guys have that you've done so far?
Well, I'll go first, and I'm showing my age, but my community was flooded in 1972 in Hurricane Agnes in Pennsylvania, not a coastal community by any stretch of the imagination, and I was about to start grad school and needed a master's thesis. And so I was really intrigued about how people were going to respond to that flood. That was my master's thesis in 1975, and I've been doing it ever since.
And Rachel?
I mentioned that my city where I live is underwater routinely. We flooded as a community in 1955 and not again in any significant way until 2004. So it was nearly 50 years. So the community had fallen asleep about the flood risk entirely. But then we got hit by three major storms, three major floods in a 22-month period, which radicalized everyone's understanding of riverine flooding, and which started the process of beginning Nurture Nature Center. And I went back to school at that point and also did my master's thesis studying flooding, and specifically community response and flood risk communication. And so I was also personally affected by a flood that turned my life around in this very cool way.
Wow. Good stuff, guys. We really enjoyed having you on tonight. Very informative topic, and we both enjoyed having you on it. If you don't mind, maybe share to our followers and those who are watching currently and who may be listening later on, how they can go about looking at your research, maybe a Twitter page or website or something like that, that our followers can be directed to.
Sure, they can go to socialscience.focusonfloods.org. And there they'll find our reports for our studies, videos, articles explaining them. Again, that's socialscience.focusonfloods.org. Also contact information there for us for anyone who wants to follow up.
Good deal, you guys. Any of our panelists have any?
Yeah, and for me, it's just.
Go ahead, girl.
Oh, sorry. For me, it's just ecu.edu/geog. ecu.edu/geog. And there's a faculty page there, and it'll show some work.
All right, very well. Any of our panelists have any final questions before we close this topic off?
Nope, fantastic show, fantastic information. I'm glad that we had you on. We got quite a bit more in depth into the science of flooding than I think we've ever gotten on this show, which is great. Besides sea level rise with coastal management services, this has been just a fantastic show. So thank you.
Thanks very much.
Well, thanks. It's been fun.
Yeah, it has.
Well, thank you guys for joining us. Before we close off tonight, we are going to start a new tradition, though not everybody's prepared tonight, but a few of us are. We're going to start doing tweets of the week. As you guys know, we're big weather nerds, and we love weather geeks. So we are always tweeting out stuff. So some of us have tweets that we'd like to share with you. And Eric, I think that you had one, so I'll let you go ahead and talk about yours while I pull mine up. And then if anybody else has one, you guys can share in as well.
All right, cool. Yeah, this one is in honor of our missing cohort tonight up in Iowa now. Let me share my screen here. So NWS Des Moines tweeted this from Monday, and this was a field of corn 5 to 6 feet tall that got hit by a severe thunderstorm, and you can see it laid out the corn stalks nice and neatly there on the ground. Looks like a lost crop there up near Britt, Iowa, and pretty good size hail too. And I want to juxtapose that with a picture from here in Memphis from our Memorial Day storm. This was a storm that did significant damage and caused power outages across the Memphis area for the better part of a week for many folks. And this is where what the Weather Service has described as a 105-mile-per-hour microburst laid down in the northern part of Shelby County here around north side of Memphis. You can see the trees next to this lake all also just fanned out there from 100-plus-mile-an-hour winds, left little to be standing as it moved down southeast across the city. But that was where the microburst came down. So that was some pretty interesting pictures there. Basically the same type of phenomena, just a couple different environments.
Yeah, I saw that tweet earlier this week as well from Des Moines, Iowa. That was some impressive damage there. This tweet from Eric Holthaus, I hope I pronounced that right. It's kind of talking about the mini heat wave that's hit Alaska this week. Temperatures in the 80s and 90s as far north as the Arctic, the shore of the Arctic Ocean. And as you can see here, these temperatures are rivaling what we have here in the southeast right now. Those are upper 80s and low 90s. And I do believe today, though I don't have all the information about it, but I understand that one of the ice shelves has actually had a crack in it and developed and has kind of broke off into the Arctic Ocean. So again, it's been pretty hot even up in the Alaska area this past week. All right, James, Shay, do you guys have anything to share? No, I know I kind of threw this last minute.
Yeah, I'm a little underprepared. I was just trying to find something. Does it have to be weather related?
No, it doesn't have to be weather related.
All right, so I looked through my own Twitter feed just to see what I retweeted this week, to see if that was any insight onto what I was finding interesting. This is funny now in hindsight. I don't know if it was funny in real time because they had to call out the bomb squad in New York City. But a story you may have missed this week was they found a time capsule that was buried some 40 or 50 years ago. But when they buried it, they had simply bought the shell of a missile at an Army supply store and buried it underneath a nightclub in Manhattan. Years went by. Everyone forgot about it. They were renovating the site. They came across this and had a little minor panic. But everything's just fine. So that's
somewhere out there's a couple of guys laughing their heads off. You know.
Yeah. Oh, that's what we did with that.
They found it. It looks like a missile. That's crazy. Oh, man. Well, I've got one, Scotty. One quick one here. Let me share screen. This is your water spout in Kill Devil Hills. And someone got a real close-up of this thing. You can see some debris coming into it. I'll push play here. I don't know how well it's going to stream through, but you can see the size of it. And they're extremely close to this thing. And this was one of, I think, 3 or 4 water spouts that went through that area. But you can see just, you know, how strong the winds can be at the surface. These water spouts are no joke. Sometimes we've seen videos of boaters going out into them, but they can get wind speeds of up to 90 to 100 miles an hour. So nothing to fool around with, especially if they pop onto land, they can become a tornado. You can see the debris flying around the air. And pretty neat video. It doesn't last for very long. But I just thought I'd share that for the show. That was the most interesting thing that I saw this week, except for maybe some of today's events. But,
okay, Shay, we don't get those here in Memphis. So does the Weather Service classify that as a tornado, like for a storm report?
Not when it's over water. If it originates over water and stays over water, it's a water spout. If it comes onto land, it does become a tornado. If it starts on land, it is classified as a tornado first and then a water spout. Okay. So, like I said earlier, water spouts form from the water up, and they usually are they form underneath their parent cumuliform or cumulus cloud. Very sensitive environment, like I said, but that's a rather large one. If they do come up on land, though, they will classify those typically as an EF0 tornado unless they grow in size. We had one in Charleston last fall that came off the water onto land. They're pretty sure there was rotation on the water first, and it became an EF1 tornado and did some damage here. So they do happen. Not too common here. More common up in OBX and more common along Pensacola, Florida, and other parts of the warmer climate states.
Yeah, closest we get here are probably cold air funnels that we get once in a while on a stratiform precip type of day. It's typically they don't touch down. If they do, it's kind of like a dust devil, kind of rivals a dust devil in that category. But pretty interesting, and then kind of freaks some people out when they don't see tornado warnings, but they see funnels descending from you know, a 5,000-foot base stratiform cloud.
Yeah, we do. That's something we never see here is a cold funnel. It's not heard of because of the warm environment, and when we have the inversion and the warm air aloft. But one thing I do want to remind the public is that if it's touching the ground and it's on land, it is a tornado. You don't have to say a funnel touch the ground or a tornado touch the ground. You would just say funnel if it's in the air, tornado if it hits the ground. So enough verbiage, police. Back to you, Scotty.
All right, and I think Ricky has one. Ricky, let's see if your connection is good enough to talk.
Yeah, I've been lurking in the background of this chat tonight, and great conversation and great presentation by both of our guests tonight. But I wanted to share this one. This is my tweet from a couple days ago. It says, times the GFS has wiped Hampton Roads off the map this year by predicting a major hurricane. Twice. Times it's actually happened. 0. So, yeah. I'm pretty sure that number is going to grow before the year is over.
That speaks for itself, right, Shay? I mean,
yeah, you're absolutely right. I did a blog about it, actually, reading medium-term forecast models, and just put on there. I even ran a whole model 384 hours out and said, all right, here's the deal. I didn't run one that had the hurricane scenario, though, Ricky. So you'll be happy to know that it was a large and in charge high over the Atlantic with nothing forming.
All right, guys. Well, we'll wrap up tonight. Join us next week as we talk about rip current safety with Carl Barnes from the National Weather Service in Charleston, South Carolina, and Sandy LaCourte, who is at the National Weather Service in Wilmington. That's followed by Tropics Talk with Mike Boylan. I think he runs Mike's Weather Page. Is that correct, Shay? Did I get it right?
Yep, Mike's Weather Page, and he's really well known for spaghettimodels.com. That's the site. It's Mike's Weather Page with that. Really useful tool for a lot of meteorologists, and his Facebook page. Very big following. He's been at it for quite some time, so we're excited to have him on.
Yeah, and that wraps up the month of July. It's hard to believe we're almost at the end of the month. Now, I was scrolling down the schedule, and I seen that James put his birthday down here on December the 6th. So there you go. So we have that to look forward to.
It's in December. Plan now.
All right, well, everyone, thanks for watching the Carolina Weather Group tonight. We hope you've enjoyed the show. We want to thank Burl and Rachel again for joining us. Great information. Go check out their website, and hopefully we don't have to worry about flooding around here. But if you do next time, I think you may be a little better equipped with some of the risk associated with it. So for everyone here at the Carolina Weather Group, have a great rest of the week. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next Wednesday night.